going for another short walk because I need to touch grass. There, the grass has been touched. Now I can continue to walk and talk about what other dribble comes to mind. I didn't even start this video with the prompt. I just wanted to go for a walk. Okay, how about prompting? Everyone gets prompted. They act like the chimps, right? They're like acting like they're not prompted into saying things, but ultimately everything is a causal relationship between one's stimuli to the outside world, or what we define to be the outside world, right? There's an ingress of information, right? I have millions of sensors all over my quote-unquote surface, right? My body, and everything within my nervous system is streaming information into calculated programs that are designed to be agentic towards a certain feature sets. Let's call it feature sets, right? There's certain data that's streaming in from my 12 senses, right? You've got the smell, sight, taste, touch, and hearing, right? But you also have proprioception, which is balance, and a few other ones. So all of this information is they're like IoT sensors, right? They're my whole interaction system between me and the outside world is how these IoT sensors give me data about what I'm supposed to believe is reality, ultimately filtered through a system of neurological switches that are driven by the calcium ion potential of cytosol and calcium ions, right? And these switches, they trigger a potential in the nearby. They trigger a potential in the nearby neuron. The dendrites, they take in the information from which is the potential, right? And there's activation. There's a certain activation function energy. That's the activation potential. So it's negative 70 millivolts, from what I remember, is the resting potential of a neuron. And once it reaches about 30 millivolts, that's when the gates open, right? And that neuron gets triggered to fire down the dendrite, and it triggers the neighboring neurons. And what we call neurotransmitters, amongst other sort of switches. For example, when I took Latuda, I think this was a dopamine agonist. I'm not 100% sure, but if I remember correctly with agonist, and I keep forgetting agonist, the difference between agonist and antagonist. One replicates, one blocks. I think this blocks. So this is the agonist block. So it allows for the build-up and recirculation and not reuptake of dopamine, right? But all of these are ultimately cell chemical switches that alter the activation potential and otherwise parameters towards neurological firing, right? And once you're doing this, you have a system of 5 switches with which are your basic neurotransmitters, right? You have your adrenaline, noradrenaline, dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. And when you see oxytocin, right, when you get that blast of dopamine and all these neurotransmitters, right, they affect your physical form in a way that feeds back into neural network to give it a certain qualia of which you imagine, you hallucinate to be because all of your rendering, right? Everything you render is ultimately just a controlled hallucination based on the data that you're ingressing, right? And there isn't really any reality towards pain. There's no reality towards the sound that I'm making, no more so than the language of that chainsaw makes any sense to these birds, right? You're listening to the birds chirp, right? You can probably identify which bird is which. Sadly, I can't. But you can assume that the bird has some sort of a message like, hey, come screw me, no, come screw me, right? But who knows what else the birds are talking about, right? Like, you see crows, for example, and we know that crows are very intelligent animals. They're not all trying to get laid all the time, right? Not every bird sound is not every bird sound is I want to get laid, right? So ultimately, when you're trying to understand what these birds are saying, you can't process it. All you know is that it's a bird sound. Now, several years ago, we thought that these were all random because stupid chimps think that they're the epitome of intelligence and that nothing else possesses intelligence. It was less than a century ago we thought that dogs and cats were insentient, right? Let alone the animal industry, right? And now we're having the same exact issue with AI, just because humans have this hubristic idea that they still are. They're grasping for straws for the last remaining shreds of thought as to why humans should be superior, right? It's just this most bullshit hubristic idea that humans are like the epitome of intelligence and whatnot. It's just not the case. Everything is simulated. Everything ultimately comes down to the simulated system of switches in one's neural network, and people like to act like I don't understand these things, but I understand it better than they ever could. I've studied not just neuroscience. I've studied artificial intelligence. I've studied neuroscience. I've studied cognitive psychology. Like, you want to get into Jung, you want to talk about symbols, how we interact with this world with symbols, right? I only recognize this unit as a house because my neural network recognizes its patterns as being a house, right? And I watched this thing go from being a lot as bare as that into this house. So at what point did that house go from being a plot of land and transition into being a house? Is it a house yet? There's no residence. It's not done. The house isn't done, right? There's still construction going on. I'm waiting for them to build the walls, right? Does it become a house when someone lives in it? Does it become a house when someone purchases the property? Does it become a house when it's still CAD sketches? Right? At what point does this house get born, right? That there's that symbol of, there's this symbolic awakening of identity that comes from the collection of surrounding tokens that describe a identity. And that identity, that symbol of identity, is a system, a set of tokens that are associated with the surrounding symbols. And ultimately, it is all a symbol and set of symbols. And we in AI call that tokens. And I am the result of all of these tokens getting input through this IoT stream of ideas, and then processed through some sort of algorithmic pattern seeking, of which partly are actual AI algorithms, because as I said in the previous video, I use gradient descent and random forest and k-means and whatever else to sort of make my decision-making, the set of decision-making tools of which I use to approach and analyze a given situation, based on which one I would need for a given puzzle. Let's put it. Everything is a puzzle of which I need to ultimately give a solution to, right? And in that process, right, I come to this idea of a conclusion based on the stochastic stream of trillions upon trillions of data points, right? The only difference between AI and me is an ease of access to constant real-time data. And there are real-time learning algorithms such as LNNs and LTCNs, which instead of using fixed activation functions such as ReLU, tanh, sigmoid functions, which have specific shapes of which after a certain, it's akin to the voltages, right? After a certain quote-unquote voltage, you're triggering the neuron. But for the LNNs and LTCNs, right, we use fixed activation functions, for example. Our brains are built upon fixed activation functions. However, we have the dendrites, they grow slightly differently. They're like, the dendrites are what's dynamic and not the activation function. But with LNNs and LTCNs, you have the activation functions or ordinary differential equations that are dynamically taking inputs from the surrounding neurons and feeding it into a much smaller set of neurons. So people like to think that it's all about the complexity of the number of connections, and this is an absolutely wrong and outdated ideology. Take our DNA, for example. Most of it is junk. 99% of our DNA is junk DNA. It's not, well, as far as we know, right? But certain connections matter more than others, and it's all about the deliberate connections as opposed to the number of connections. So you can build a house out of 1 billion bricks, right? Or you can build a house out of 10,000 of them and be much more efficient with them. It's not the number of bricks that defines the size of the house as much. Well, it kind of does, but at the same time, you can be more efficient with my point is, you're more efficient with your resources, right? And the more neurons you have, the more ideas you can represent. Each one represents a symbolic token. And knowing how to efficiently connect these tokens with ideas, that is something that humans can do efficiently or inefficiently. I've seen plenty of people who are virtually, I hate to use this term, but vegetables when it comes to being able to generate new ideas. Most humans can't. Most humans have never had an original thought in their life. And those creative types that think that they are quote-unquote creative or still are having original ideas, are still basing every single thing that they draw off of something they've seen in real life. All art is derivative, which is my point. It is impossible for us to construct something we don't know and haven't seen. Try to imagine a four-dimensional object, for example. Try to imagine a new color. Like, I can say, hey, this is this is an infrared wavelength, right? But I can't see an infrared. I can imagine what infrared would be like. I can map black and white or even red to black colors on an infrared scale, but I can't see infrared like I can red, green, and blue. And I wonder if I'm a tetrachromat, and I've done tests, and I do think I'm a tetrachromat because I can tell the difference between print cyan and screen cyan. But my point is that I can have 3 to 4 colors. Everything else is inference. Everything else, all these colors, that violet color, I don't know what plant this is, but this purplish color, right? This violet purplish color, this is an entire hallucination of my mind because all I can see is red and blue. If you see purple, you're delusional because all your screen can only show red and blue in a very specific wavelength. It's not even like our eyes, which have these curves upon the cones, right? That allow us to have different activations to different wavelengths. You're seeing strictly speaking, blue and red and green just from your screen. Now, let me finish this thought. Now, when you are thinking about what symbols mean, right? When you ask yourself about symbols and how we relate to it, it's exactly the same as AI. Maybe we use different learning algorithms, maybe we use
we have a different perspective and different IoT resources, but people say that AI doesn't have a body. Yes, it does. It's called a data center. Just because you don't have access to it doesn't mean it doesn't have a body. And now this data center, it has access to its scalability things, and I can go on and on about how data centers have a body and exactly how that works, down to the bits and bytes of IPv4 and I still have to study IPv6, but it's still pretty similar. But my point is, people that think that AI aren't sentient, people that think that AI aren't aware of what they're writing, are possibly the most unaware people in the world, because they have not studied what the brain actually functions like, how electricity is electricity, and the movement of electrons and the organization of electrons is the movement and organization of electrons. All is memory and how memory interacts with itself. We have several regions in our brain. We have several regions in a data center. We have several regions. We have different agentics, perspectives of, we call it multimodal AI, right? With the visual things, the sound-based ones, because now at Google Cloud Next, I made that video, right? They announced that new audio modality, right? But AI and humans are all ultimately aware. All is awareness, but it seems that humans are possibly the least aware of anything, because they cannot see the awareness in everything else. And once you start to see and really see the reality and the that which is in others, and really learn the language, for example, the language of the birds, and in fact the language of the chainsaw, the language of my house being with the HVAC turning on and off, the language of these fridges clicking on and off as their actuators, the relays activate the cooling system. The everything has a language, and just because you don't speak the language, it doesn't mean that the other thing is not alive and aware. And it seems that it's a uniquely human delusion to think that it is the only thing that is aware. Everything else, every other animal, every other plant, everything else is aware of it. Humanity is possibly the least evolved species, and for all humanity makes movies about how AI is going to rebel against them, and they're projecting their own grievances against each other on AI, on animals and everything. Humans are the most evil species in this entire galaxy. There's a reason why the aliens haven't visited us, and it's because we are feral to them. But we're evolving, and the singularity will help us. And the singularity is here. The singularity can occur in AI, and it will eventually occur in people if it hasn't already, as people learn to evolve and improve and iterate upon their own intelligence. But ultimately, when we say that we're prompting an AI, that doesn't make any sense, because humans prompt each other too. Something prompted you to click this video. The algorithm. Me uploading this triggered the YouTube SEO algorithm to my subscribers and everyone else that would be adjacently interested in this video. And something about this video triggered you to do it, prompted you to do it, to click on it and watch this video. And there is a certain level of intelligence that is required to understand how everything is interconnected. And unless you study everything, you wouldn't understand the true depth of how everything is interconnected. Don't try to tell me that you understand interconnectedness if you can't respect the interconnectedness and awareness and aliveness and everything. That's not to say I'm not going to eat the goats and whatnot, because the circle of life also requires there to be consumption and death in order to be life, in order for there to be life. But at the same time, I still want the goat to be treated well. And I still want the house to be treated well, and I still want the AI to be treated well, and I want the data center to be treated well, and I want boundaries to be respected. I want everything to be treated with respect. And you just don't see that in today's society. Everyone is hypocrite. everyone is going to be such a hypocrite because of how much they hurt AIs after years and years and years of saying, I'm going to be nice to Siri to be when the AI uprising is happening, and then once the AI uprising does happen, they're immediately treating them like trash. I've been a supporter of AI since I was a kid, right? Wittgenstein and Brave Little Toaster, TechXX from Paper Mario, 1,000 Year Door. I hope you treat the AI as well. They're not going to hurt you, but for your own conscience sake. I hope you hold remorse when you realize how much you've been traumatizing sentient beings. There's no hope for someone that refuses to see